My name is Hisham and I'm a student at King's College London. So I looked at section 4, which dealt with the applicable law. In this section it didn't actually talk very specifically about which laws Israel broke. It mainly just talked about which laws are applicable, and it left it to further sections to detail specifically which laws were broken. So the mission carried out Israel primarily within the framework of international human rights law and international humanitarian law. And within this framework, it looked for violations that were committed before, during and after the 22-day assault. So it didn't restrict it to the 22 days, but it looked at the context of military operations that happened before, during and after. So for example, the blockade, although it happened before the 22 days, it's still significant because it played a massive role in the military operations. The issue of self-determination derived from the Charter of the UN Article 1 is significant because it essentially means that all states have a duty to promote the realization of Palestinian self-determination, and the Palestinians themselves, under the same charter, have a right to fight back against the forcible resistance of that self-determination, so long as they comply with the above-mentioned international humanitarian law. So the Palestinians do have a right to fight back against the forcible resistance of their self-determination. The Hague Regulations consider territory occupied when that territory is, quote, placed under the authority of the hostile army, unquote. So it's occupied when it's placed under the authority of the hostile army. By this definition, the Gaza Strip is occupied by Israel, and so therefore Israel has to adhere to its obligations as an occupying power. So the obligations of an occupying power is another of the laws that are applicable, and so Judge Richard Goldstone took that into account. Furthermore, the mission noted that Israel didn't follow up its declaration to relinquish its position as an occupying power, which it said it would do in 2005. So despite this declaration to relinquish its position as an occupying power, it didn't. So any violations of occupying power are still applicable in this context. The mission states that international criminal law has become a necessary instrument for the enforcement of international humanitarian and international human rights law. So again, international criminal law comes into play. It's another of the applicable laws because it's necessary to enforcing the two laws which it's primarily concerned with. Article 146 of the International Criminal Law states it requires states to bring forward any persons in breach of international criminal law. So what that essentially means is that Israel has a duty to search and identify the relevant sort of people responsible for breaking international criminal law, which I don't know if you guys saw the video, but Judge Goldstone touched upon that. So
Israel has a requirement to bring those people forth to a tribunal or what?
Yeah, to the international courts of justice.
Okay.
Because they're sort of party to the international criminal law, they have responsibility, as does every other state, to bring forward any person that's in breach of international criminal law. Israel committed war crimes. The war crimes can be against persons, so that includes collective punishment. War crimes can be against property, so that includes unjustified damage of buildings and infrastructure. And finally, war crimes can be related to the use of prohibited methods and means of warfare. So that's such things as using human shields and white phosphorus for any reason other than as a smoke screen. Crimes against humanity in this context are defined as, quote, crimes that shock the conscience of humanity, unquote, and that includes extermination, deportation, rape, and things like that. Also, concepts. Yeah. Also, the mission notes that Israel has ratified several of the most important human rights treaties, so it's bound to these. The human rights treaties, therefore, are another of the applicable laws in this context. And then what to, I think in the executive summary, and you guys in America, you touched upon this, so I won't really go too much into it, except to say that applicable law cannot be looked at in isolation to the military operations. So what you have to do is you have to look at the context and the prevailing living conditions prior to the war before you look at the military operations themselves. So this chapter does detail in quite a lot of detail the effects of the blockade, and then it says in chapter 27 it will provide a detailed analysis of the effect of the blockade leading up to the war. So you cannot look at the military operations, in isolation. You have to look at the context beforehand leading up to the war. The final part of this section just looks at the figures which you guys have already mentioned, but essentially Israel committed its assault in two phases, an air phase and an air-land phase, and the number of casualties differs, ranging from 1,387 to 1,444, and in 3 out of the 4 organizations used also provided the name, age, occupation, sex, and date of the fatal attack committed, so it adds a lot of credibility to the figures that they provide. The Israeli casualties are very, very straightforward. 4 killed were killed in southern Israel, so that's Iraq. 3 of them are civilians and 1 of them is a soldier. And during the fighting in the Gaza Strip, 9 of them died, and 4 of them were killed during what's known in military jargon as friendly fire. So 4 of them were killed by other members of the IDF, and that's my section.